The benefits of nature are well reported, vast and varied. But before we get into exploring those, let's first ask ourselves the question, why do we expect nature to influence our happiness so much? I'm Claire Warner, co-founder of Acorn Aperitifs, and today I'm joined by two of my favourite nature nerds. Claire Ratinon is a grower, writer and author of an upcoming book, How to Grow Your Dinner Without Leaving the House. Claire is also a passionate advocate for the act of growing plants, especially edible ones, and the potential for this to be nourishing, connecting and healing. Fabiano Latham is Raker Vodka brand ambassador and self-confessed nature obsessive. He will be taking us through the brilliant adventure of tea and encouraging us all to take our first doorstep mile. We're going to cover a lot today, but mainly we're going to look at how to find happiness in nature and our compatibility for nature. What is soft fascination and really what is adventurivity? Some of the barriers to happiness in nature, what's being done to improve access to nature, and what you can do for easy, moderate or an immersive experience of nature. And then finally we're going to give you a 30-day nature happiness challenge. I got my first pair of wellies when I was 33. They were egg yolk yellow and branded with Veuve Clicquot. Even with my brand new pair of yellow-orange wellies, the idea of actually wearing them seemed improbable. Not because they were Clicquot wellies, but because I just didn't actually go anywhere where they'd be needed. The idea of wearing a flat shoe was kind of strange and off-putting, mainly because I thought I'd look like a potato. I also remember thinking they were just too bright yellow-orange to go with anything in my wardrobe, which I know is kind of missing the point, but simply put, I just wasn't the type of person who would wear wellies. So I now have more pairs of shoes covered in mud than I don't, and I often think back to that 33-year-old Claire and wonder where she went. But then I remembered how long it took me to actually find a pair of walking boots that weren't too ugly, and I realised that she's in there somewhere, probably scowling. So many of you will know my absolute love of nature and the fact I bang on about it and evangelise about it. So this notion that my first pair of wellies was a bright yellow branded pair of wellies that I got at the age of 33 might seem strange. Am I not, after all, this sort of self-confessed nature geek that gives you soil when you come to my seminars? So the short answer is yes and no. Yes, I adore nature now, as I did when I was a kid. Back then I immersed myself in it, I made up stories about it, I took ants on epic voyages around the garden and dropped them off somewhere, hoping that they'd find their way back home. I pressed petals, climbed trees and I grazed my knees in it. I found silence and solace in it when my parents were screaming and then hid in it when they were divorcing. It was my green sanctuary, the bugs my pets, the flowers my fragrance, the trees my canopy of protection.
And then I grew up and simply forgot about nature.
So I disassociated myself from it. I just didn't pay it very much attention. I saw through it or I flew over it. I bought pot plants from IKEA to brighten up my student digs or my tiny little London flats. And those plants I didn't really even think about until I had to remember to water them. And those plants were just patches of green in the periphery of my vision that was otherwise directed at my career or cute boys or trying to be a grown-up. So what changed? Quite simply, I got sad. I burnt too many candles at all the wrong ends, flew way too many miles and didn't spend enough time on the ground. Finally, without really thinking about why, I started to go for long walks somewhere pretty and then some runs along riverbanks, and finally I fell head over heels, got a dog, some new wellies and never looked back. So for me today, now, nature is my happy place. And I've spent the last few years trying to persuade many of you, many people, that it could be your happy place too if you just simply give it a go. Go outside, I'd say, give nature a go, get your hands dirty. Nature really is amazing. Nature can make us happier and kinder and more resilient. I have proof. The World Happiness Report is a landmark survey of the state of global happiness that ranks 156 countries by how happy their citizens perceive themselves to be. The World Happiness Report 2020, for the first time, ranks cities around the world by their subjective well-being and digs more deeply into how the social, urban and natural environments combine to affect our happiness. And there are 3 potentially overlapping reasons. First, biophilia refers to the hypothesis that there exists an instinctive close connection between human beings and other living organisms or specific habitats arising from biological evolution, whereby nature has a direct positive impact on happiness shaped by our evolutionary origins. There is indeed evidence in psychology suggesting that being exposed to green, natural environments improves mental well-being. Mechanisms include a reduction in stress, a rise in positive emotions, cognitive restoration, and positive effects on self-regulation. And you don't even need a lot of nature for it to be good for you. Short-term exposure is enough for us to reap the benefits. In a classical study, Urich in 1984 studied the recovery records of surgical patients in a suburban Pennsylvania hospital between 1972 and 1981. Patients were randomly assigned rooms that overlooked natural settings or urban settings. Those who were able to look out over natural scenes recovered quickly, required less pain medication, and were less abrasive to the nursing staff. Interestingly, people do not anticipate these effects. Nisbet and Zelensky in 2011 show that people systematically underestimate the well-being benefits of nature, potentially failing to maximise their well-being by spending more time in natural settings. Second, green, natural environments may have an indirect positive impact by encouraging certain behaviours, for example, physical exercise or social interaction, through the provision of public open spaces, which improves mental or physical health and longevity, and thereby happiness. The health benefits of green, natural environments are well documented. There is evidence in the medical literature for both mechanisms. Natural environments encourage physical activity, which brings about health benefits that may be unevenly distributed among the population, while encouraging social interaction. Socialising with friends, relatives or spouses is among the strongest determinants of happiness. Finally, green, natural environments may have a higher environmental quality by being free of certain environmental stressors, such as air or noise pollution, which are associated with respiratory and cardiovascular disease and heightened stress levels. At the same time, they may provide environmental goods such as scenic amenity or land cover for recreation. Both have indirect impacts on happiness, but stressors can, arguably, also have direct impacts by causing worries when they are noticeable to people. But here's the sticking point. Yes, we're hardwired to appreciate nature, and yes, the benefits of spending time in nature are well documented, varied and vast. Yet we don't all have equal access to beautiful, green, open, safe spaces. We might not have grown up with a garden, or a park, or a beach, or even a field nearby. We might all be well aware of the benefits of nature, but either lack the time, the resources, or access, or simply the inclination to spend time in it. Studies show that if you weren't exposed to nature as a child, you will grow up not being able to access the benefits of it. Children aren't the only ones growing up with nature deficit disorder. Adults and grown-ups now have it too. Opportunities to experience nature are important for human well-being, and much of this has been discussed in the context of lockdown life. Yet access is often inequitably distributed across society. Socioeconomic variation can explain some of this inequity, but there's been relatively little consideration of how access to different kind of nature experiences varies across the country as a whole. Barriers to outside play particularly affect children from low-income and BAME households, which means that the benefits of nature are not available to us all equitably. Lastly, most worryingly, for some of us, spending time in the great outdoors can be a perilous act. Before we can talk about if and when and how nature can make us happy, we need to acknowledge that for many, finding happiness in nature isn't as simple as a walk in the park. Way before COVID and lockdown even entered our vocabulary, we were already migrating indoors. We're currently living through the largest human mass migration on record, with more of us living in urban centres than not. In 2010, the human species was officially classified as an urban species, a bit like the town fox, the grey squirrel, or even the city rat. Nice. We spend roughly 90% of our time indoors, and of the remaining 10%, half of that is spent in a car. Not only are we physically withdrawing from nature, we're also living through the technology age, with around 95% of us owning a smartphone and spending much of our days staring at screens of all different shapes and sizes. So we've built walls to separate us from the natural world, and we look at screens more than we look outside of the window. The net result on our mental and physical health has been extreme, with high levels of stress and anxiety the norm, rather than the exception. But only recently have we really begun to understand why living in urban centres is particularly stressful for the human condition, and why many recent studies have shown that when we migrate to cities for work and convenience, the structure and the environment creates a constant low-level stress for our brains. And the brain has not evolved as quickly as our environments have transformed. So ask yourself the question, are you an indoors person or an outdoors person? So let's go and talk to Claire, who was very much an indoor person, but is now very much an outdoor person. So Claire, this is beautiful. This is an incredible part of the world to live in. Tell us how you got here.
I'm a relative newcomer to all of this. So I'm a reasonably new food grower, a new kind of nature lover. I've been a school gardener, and I've worked in growing for restaurants and veg box schemes, and then I've grown plants in all the most implausible of places, and I've done it wherever I could. And for me, I got into food growing completely by chance. You know, I was really lucky. I was walking in New York, in Queens, and was looking for something that didn't exist, and found this amazing rooftop farm, and this really pivotal space was where my eyes were opened to the process of growing food and how magnificent that is. And food growing has been like the gateway through which I have come back to nature. It amazes me now that so much of my understanding of just how food grows is so elemental to what it is to be human. Like the process of sowing a seed and doing what it takes to bring a plant to the point where you can harvest it is like one of the only processes that universally upholds us all, right? Yeah. But I didn't even understand that, and so walking onto that rooftop farm, it just occurred to me that I'd never engaged my brain in understanding that totally magical alchemical process, which is like the foundation of civilization. Right? It's just like, it never occurred to me that it was something that I might need to know about. I was just assumed as long as the supermarkets had full shelves that everything was just taken care of. Yeah. But I realised that what I know is like 0.00001% of this magnificent world, and that just feels so deeply exciting to me, that there's so much to learn, and that because I'm so captivated by it, that could be that's the rest of my life set. Like I will just constantly be enamoured and in wonder forever. Food is so important to me. It's something that was like like so foundational to what it means to be to the immigrant experience. Like food is so it's love. It's like grounds you in your family's in history, in your family's story, in the food that my parents cooked was like cooked with so much love and abundance that it's like it's how we celebrated, it's how we commiserated, it's how we expressed love. Like I still say that like growing food and feeding people is my love language. Like it was even before I knew how to do it. Like providing food is just the way that we express ourselves most deeply. And so but yeah, you're right, it existed separately. It was still something to be acquired, and I never really inquired as to what it took to get food to the point where I could just go and buy it, or someone else bought it and then we cooked it together and ate it. And so seeing it unfolding on that rooftop and everything I've learned since and made part of my life has not only been the kind of closing of that circle of understanding between me and the food that I eat and the food that I give to other people, but it has also been the kind of weaving together of my understanding of how we sit as beings of nature. It's like I didn't really understand myself as a being that was like within a thriving ecosystem, both like essential to it and benefiting from it. I didn't see that before, and growing food is what has kind of allowed me to situate myself in that, and then situate us all as well. This is not just a kind of a journey for me. It's an understanding of how we're all connected and how quite literally everything is connected, and that nature is the thing that weaves us together and upholds us. What
was the original barrier for you when you described the moment of like finding the farm and then thinking, oh, this is wow? Before that part, was it just that you hadn't grown up in nature, or was there something that repelled you from it?
So many stories that we're told about like what does success look like, what does an aspirational future look like, especially how we're taught and what we see growing up as like the what success looks like,
Yeah.
what a good life looks like, what financial stability looks like. And so it never occurred to me that like maybe working outdoors could be something I could push myself towards, or that was something that was of value and of worth. And so I think there's a really powerful story that's as part of like the kind of immigrant narrative of like how important it is to present yourself well, to be clean and tidy, and so going out and getting mucky in nature is like anathema to that. It doesn't make any sense within the kind of framework of what it looks like to kind of be aspirational and upwardly mobile and all the things that we're supposed to be aspiring to as you know, as young people. And so I think there was a multitude of things happening, from invisibility to actively thinking that like not only is that not for me, but to do that would get in the way of the things that I'm supposed to be pushing myself towards and focusing on. And I was bookish naturally, so I think my parents really encouraged that. And so, you know, the more time you spend withdrawing from the outside world, I think the more time you other it and see it as oppositional. And I think that's probably where I ended up. And I remember really clearly just thinking it was relevant and not being particularly drawn to it. And not even that I wasn't drawn to it, but that I actively kind of felt oppositional to it. And so, you know, I didn't see anybody like me growing up doing this work and loving it, actually. And I do occupy an unusual space within that work, you know. But nonetheless, I do think that it's really important to see people, whatever that looks like, who look like me, working outside, engaging in nature in a way that feels like possible and accessible and joyful. And you know, and there's an aspect of reclamation of that, of that space as something that can belong to people who look like me, as well as, you know, because if you look in the outdoors industry and the gardening media, there is a very certain image that is used repeatedly, and that one is a white one, predominantly. It's white and it's middle class, and that is exclusionary for a lot of people, and images are powerful. If you don't see yourself, it can be really hard to imagine yourself in that space feeling safe and welcome and okay, and so I think that played a huge part in me never imagining myself doing this work, and probably why I came to it so late.
Absolutely.
Sometimes it's about, you know, information and education and support. I remember when I didn't really understand what waterproof was, and I know that sounds like a really ridiculous thing to say, but I just assumed if it was like plasticky, if you were wearing a plasticky jacket, that you would be fine, and then wore a like Adidas zip up and got in torrential rain and was like soaked, and I was just I just realised that I didn't understand the difference between like just wearing something that had like a seemingly plastic outer to something that's legitimately waterproof, actually having the right equipment, and then actually that's expensive as well, so you know, that's not like particularly accessible to some people, and so we need to like look at the things that the literal physical things that people need, and ask why that's not an accessible thing for you know, so many people. We live in a society that really values that the time that we spend has a purpose, and I don't know, I think that there's an element of like, even watching TV feels like it has a purpose, because you watch something and you like laughed or enjoyed it, and you were told a story, and you get to the end and there's a sense that something happened. Whereas in nature there's not necessarily that kind of beginning, middle and end, or an outcome that we can nod to, that we're like, oh, this is the thing that we achieved today. And so I think that addressing and unraveling that expectation in children and in adults too, that every experience doesn't have to have, you know, this tangible sense of like, well, I did it because of. Because the thing about being in nature is actually the undoing of that doing mindset, that like having to achieve mindset. The thing about what is possible in nature is to ease all of that, and that's the thing I think is most powerful, and my experience of it has been most powerful, is really turning the kind of view back on myself as to why I feel like I had to always be a productive being. Like, why are my values caught up in what I can achieve and what I have done today, and like, could it actually be okay for me to have spent a gentle day doing very little, spent amongst nature? What's that for? And arguably there is an outcome there, because that's what upholds our sense of connection and our well-being. But because it doesn't look like it fits within, it fits in within like kind of a traditional idea of a productive and useful and a day of utility, it makes it really hard to like carve that time out. Like, could you imagine spending a kind of, you know, Thursday morning just be like, I'm going on a walk. Well, it's a work day. I'm going to turn my email off. Absolutely not. You know, you couldn't imagine doing that. And if that's the thing that those 2 hours make it possible for you to turn up for your family, for your children, for your work, for everything. Those 2 hours are probably the most two precious hours of your week.
You know, what you get from nature is the fact that it allows you to turn your busy brain off, and what it gives back to you is creativity, the ability to connect ideas, less stress, less worry, less rumination. But if you go out into nature with the purpose of trying to get it to help you, you know, relieve your stress, then that's not the purpose of nature, right?
It's true.
I must do this walk because then I will be less stressed.
It's so true.
It's not the tick.
Well, the grasping is the problem, right?
Yeah.
If you go out there and you're expecting nature to deliver something to you, then I think you're always going to be disappointed, because I think if you go with an agenda, then your mind, you're not present, right? Your mind is asking for something, but nature's just like, I'm just here. Doing my thing. You should just do your thing too.
And
like, we should be exactly.
Like,
we should do what nature's doing, and it's modelling it perfectly by just being. But we're in there like, save me. I mean, arguably all of this attitude is what feeds into injustice. It feeds into inequality and the climate crisis. That idea that we can just constantly take and pillage and is at the foundation of what is problematic in the world. And you know, this year has been a particular year for reflecting on that. You know, and so I think that if you go out into nature with that same attitude, then you're just replicating the same model of like taking, and actually, what we should be doing is being, I think, in nature.
Children are just increasingly becoming more distant from nature. And can we talk a little bit about access to nature and some of those barriers, and some of the work that you've done to try and overcome some of those barriers?
Well, I think you're right. The thing that you've pointed out is how important it is for those formative experiences in nature to be positive ones, you know, and for that to be, and that's our job as adults, right? To figure out how to make access to nature at a young age, wherever you happen to be living, safe and happy, and you know, to present the joy that's possible as a possibility to children, no matter what stories they believe about what is valuable and what they should be spending their time doing. And you know, I've sort of spoken to this before, but I think it's really important to address kind of within even like formal educational scenarios, like the classroom and the school playground, like what is the point of this? Like, what can this possibly offer you? Why would we even do it if it's not productive? You know, if it's not something that if you're not studying, and if you're not trying to like push towards an exam or you know, some coursework, why would you spend time in nature? What's the point? And so I think that's something that needs to be woven through the curriculum. And I've worked as a school gardener before. It's really, really hard because schools aren't that well set up to incorporate kind of nature and growing into the curriculum, because it's ornamental. It's a side. It's reserved for some students and not for others. You know? Then it's also dealing with the kind of the yuck factor as well, because that's something that's really amazing to see in schools. Is if you've got fussy kids who prefer a frozen pizza, and then you know a muddy carrot is just like, why would you eat that? It's it's an unformed food, isn't it, for them, even though it's in its natural form. And so there's a you know, huge amount of hurdles to kind of overcome in order to make that experience accessible. Because I was amazed at how often I was just like, try and taste it to children. I feel like there's a pigeon like caught in something. Is that a very So it was amazing the amount of times that I would try and encourage children to taste the food that we'd grown, and that was really hard for them, because they were just maybe didn't eat that much more vegetables, found it really hard to believe that what came off the plant was edible. You know, and so there is a whole both like kind of parenting educationally, sort of creating the connections between what grows and how it tastes and what process it goes through to get to us, you know, and for that to be a positive experience, I think and it's really challenging. I know it's really hard to get kids to eat certain things like this. I'm not about to be like, eat this raw kale, like that would just be a formative experience of negativity, I'm sure. But yeah, I do think it really does begin in childhood, and I know that for myself that there was, even though I mean I was really fussy when I was quite young, but then when I finally kind of got over that, I really did love food and locate love within food, and that ended up being the gateway that when I was older that was able to kind of bring me back round to it. Yeah, I think, you know, the questions that we're coming up against, particularly in this year, is, you know, how do we cultivate connection when we might not be able to be in proximity with one another, and how do we create connection when we might not even be able to hold each other, and what does connection look like when we can't do the things that we've come to take for granted? And I would argue that, like, nature is the framework that we can look to for our inspiration for that. You know, it's the most beautiful example of how we are connected as beings in the world. You know, it is how interdependence is expressed over and over again in every aspect of our being. Every breath we take is quite literally upheld by the trees that are outside of our windows, and that to me is like the most profound example of what connection can look like. And I think if we can tap into that and really sense into that, then that's how we can maintain our connection in really disconnected times.
One way to achieve happiness through experiences in nature is through something I like to call adventurivity. Adventurivity used to be a combination of two words, adventure and creativity. However, in recent years it's morphed into a kind of broader noun, meaning the constant state of being adventurous and seeking new exciting experiences, big or small, within nature in order to build on attributes such as creativity, but also to become more comfortable with being uncomfortable, welcoming uncertainty, and to help quell life's smaller anxieties. So I work for an Icelandic vodka brand called Reka, and everything we do relates to our homeland and the adventurous connotations of the land of fire and ice. I spend most of my time planning adventurous experiences for bartenders to reconnect them with nature. A little bit about me first, because I am also an only child, so you know, me, which is great. So my mum definitely lives the adventurivity lifestyle, and I would like to say that I am a particular result of said adventurous lifestyle, as in 1987 she joined something called the Royal Geographical Society. The RGS is an old Victorian club that set about sending our most daring explorers around the globe to tell us about the fascinating world we live in. People such as Charles Darwin, David Livingstone, and even the mega dude himself, David Attenborough. My mum, otherwise known as Sarah, because I don't want to sound like a dweeb, travelled deep into the Brazilian Amazon rainforest with a team of 25 field experts to an island called Maracá, one of Brazil's most impressive ecological sanctuaries. They were there for over 400 days, and my mum was the only medical staff on the expedition. But she also got stuck in exploring the unique flora and fauna the island had to offer. The teams discovered countless new species, 250 new types of insect to be exact. They also discovered some botanicals which are actually used in medicine today to help combat AIDS. On this island she met my father, Luis, a local to the area growing up in the nearest town called Boa Vista. I like to describe him as kind of like the island's janitor. He was a handyman in all respects, focusing on navigating the surrounding river rapids, but with a deep understanding and knowledge of the surrounding environment. During the expedition, my mum experienced immense tropical storms, island flooding. She slept in hammocks deep in the rainforest, and she helped catch and release anacondas. Gross! She was chased by Amazonian hornets. She dug out botfly larvae from scientists. She's even sewed up the chewed remains from piranha bites. And even more scary, became pregnant with me. What a discovery! I was actually born in London, which is slightly less exotic. But when I was 2, she took me back to visit my father in Maracá. And I feel extremely privileged and deeply proud to have been a result of this amazing adventure. And it's definitely the inspiration to the way I try and live my life to this day. For me, adventure is extremely personal. It's about setting ourselves exciting tasks to overcome based on building mental and physical strength and endurance. We put our minds and bodies under varying degrees of what's known as eustress, and that's kind of like positive stress. Things like tingling nerves, the excitement about embarking on something amazing and adventurous. We do this in order to build up resilience to feelings of uncertainty. Once you get stuck in, it's incredibly addictive. Due to the feeling that we get upon completion of an adventure, our brains flood with amazing feelings of achievement as a result of these endorphins, dopamine, and serotonin. Adventurivity is the active seeking of these moments of essentially happiness. After putting ourselves through potentially daunting and exciting tasks, our brains love dopamine. It's like that tingly good time feeling in the brain when all of our senses are fired up, and it's almost blissful. We like it so much that we subconsciously remember the chain of events that led to that amazing release of dopamine, even if that chain began with something slightly scary or potentially out of our control and comfort zones. Repeating this process of setting off into the unknown, which yet results in positive reinforcement, can be thought of functional neuroplasticity. Brains! It's the training of our brains to be more comfortable being uncomfortable as we get used to being rewarded at the end of these adventures. The great thing about it is you don't need to climb Everest to experience the feeling of adventurous achievement. There's an amazing Nordic phrase known as the doorstep mile. It literally means the first mile away from your doorstep is the hardest. That first step into the unknown, the period where you could turn back and get back to safety, or you power on through. The more you subject yourselves to the doorstep mile, the easier it becomes to fling yourself into the unknown. Combine that with the power of nature, and you're well away. Every time I plan a new adventure, I try and keep this mentality of the doorstep mile front and foremost. From cycling 1,000 kilometers from Aberdeen to London, paragliding over Welsh mountains, or running endless miles up and over Scottish Munros, to even things like trying new food, learning new languages, or even public speaking or speaking to a camera. As humans, we obsess about the what-ifs, the fear of failure or being ridiculed by our peers. These feelings actually stem from our evolution. As if we were ousted by our societies or tribes back in the day, we'd be left to fend for ourselves against weird predators or unknown threats. Survival was never guaranteed when left alone in the scary, unpredictable world. However big or small the adventures we face day to day, the feeling remains the same of being under threat, being uncertain. And that's why adventure and adventurivity is so personal to each of us. If we look at adventurivity through the lens of the current pandemic we're all facing, our routines are completely mashed up. Lots of us have been forced indoors, quite rightly, and our work lives could be threatened by economic uncertainty. Depending on where you are as well, whatever your situation might be, it might be irresponsible to plan a bigger adventure that might involve travel or more human interaction. However, good news is that there's plenty of adventures that we can do closer to home or even in the safety of our own homes. All you have to do is remember that the key formula for adventure is simply novelty plus courage. Adventurivity is about accepting the feeling of being not in control, just like being subjected to the whim of Mother Nature. You soon realize there's no such thing as bad weather, just bad clothes. It's all about making small but meaningful changes, and you can start small in the safety of your own home, even in your bathroom. That's not creepy as it sounds, I promise. There's a dude called Wim Hof who's developed this kind of breathing technique which will allow you to take really long, cold showers. Bear with me, please. But it's a perfect example of an adventure at home which kind of feels very uncomfortable to begin with, but has loads of psychological and physiological benefits. Have a go at it, and write me a postcard. Which leads me on to my second point. There's a friend of mine called Callum Rickson over in Bath. Oh, Bath is this way. And what he did was he sent out 100 postcards in 100 days. And the idea of this was to prove that even though we are under lockdown, under isolation, we are certainly not isolated, particularly within this amazing industry. Or you could try a week of new recipes perhaps. Harness the inner Claire Ratinon and start to grow your own herbs, your own vegetables, and get that immense feeling of satisfaction from self-sufficiency. Give them a go. Let me know how you get on.
When pressure builds in our lives, we often say just how much we need to get away from it all to escape. And probably more than ever recently, this has felt to be the case. These expressions suggest the need for a change of environment. but they often ignore the fact that where one is headed to may be as important as where one is coming from. After all, not all changes of scenery are created equal. It's unlikely, for instance, that we would want to escape to the middle of a multi-storey car park. So what are the ingredients for a restorative environment? According to the World Health Report, photographs tagged as #fun, #vacations and #honeymoons are more likely to contain elements of nature such as plants, water and natural landscape as compared to photographs tagged #daily or #routines. This finding, which is consistent across different countries, provides global evidence of the biophilia hypothesis, humans' innate tendency to seek connection with nature, and implies a positive association between nature and fond memories in memorable events such as honeymoons. The team also found that the amount of nature experiences in a country is linked to the life satisfaction of its residents. Countries which have more elements of nature in photographs tagged as #fun, such as Costa Rica and Finland for instance, possess higher life satisfaction scores according to the scores reported in the World Happiness Report 2019. Collectively, the findings suggest the importance of nature in contributing to emotional happiness, relaxation and life satisfaction in communities worldwide. It's been so nice spending some time with you today, Claire. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
For the people who are at home or wherever they're watching this, can you give us some ideas around how can we get into nature, get connected to it, or maybe just spend a little bit more time in a more profound way with nature?
So that's a good question. I don't think that you have to upend your entire life like I have to kind of align yourself with nature more. I think you can start small, spend a little bit more time going out in nature without necessarily, running past it and running through it, taking time to take slower walks, maybe leaving your phone at home or turning it onto airplane mode. And what I really love doing and challenging people to do if this is something they really want to cultivate is a deeper connection to nature is take some time to see things through new eyes. I think the thing that I've really noticed is it wasn't so much that I didn't notice nature, it's that I come to take it for granted and that it was just a backdrop. And so when I challenge myself to look at something that I think is familiar through new eyes, it's amazing how just more engaging and more beautiful and more joyful it can be to see from that point of view. And there was this story that my friend told me. I forget which Nordic country she went to go and visit, but their herons are a pest. They're almost like pigeons are in Trafalgar Square. But when she saw them sort of all landing and taking off all together, she was just totally captivated. And then the people around her thought it was absolutely hilarious that she thought they were so brilliant because they were a pest. But for her, it was magnificent. Herons are a rarity here, aren't they? And they're so magnificent to watch take off and land and fly. And so she just found it such an amazing experience. And I just really took inspiration from that story that even the things that we've gotten really used to could be looked at once more and seen with like new awe and new wonder. So yeah, that's what I would say.
Love it. Yeah, change your perspective.
Absolutely.
See it in a different way. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We hope you've enjoyed our seminar and that something you saw or heard inspired you to get outside just a little bit more. There's so much to see all year round, and a little bit of nature every day really can help you feel happier and healthier. We'd love to challenge you to do something, big or small, every day for the next 30 days. Tag us along for your journey and we'll send a signed copy of Claire Ratinon's book to those of you who complete the challenge.